Welcome to episode 12 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Sports Science Manager at the Fremantle Dockers in the AFL and owner of oldbullfitness.com, Jason Webber. Hi guys, thanks for checking out episode 12 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. I know I say it every time, but I've got another great guest coming up today in Jason Webber. I first came across Jason's blog about a year ago, and he puts some really good stuff out there, kind of no bullshit approach, which I quite like, doesn't pull any punches, really honest. So I just thought I'd drop an email, see if he could spare half an hour to come on, which he did. And we talk about his 4 guiding principles for team training design. Jason kind of gets into the nuts and bolts of designing programs for teams. It's not the sets and reps that we kind of all want the magic answer to, but he talks about quantification, specificity, isolation and control, which is his 4 guiding principles. We also talk about his 10 tips for getting a job in professional sport and staying there. Kind of does a little bit of a summary at the end, which I think is great. He also talks a lot about technology, which I know is something he's written quite extensively in his blog. Goes into a lot of discussion also about relationships and working with technical coaches and physios, which again in his blog, that kind of fascinated me. But before we get into Jason's interview, I'd just like to say a big thank you for all the feedback I've been getting. And just like to say, if you want to keep up to date, again, a million times over, if you want to keep up to date with anything that's going on with the podcast, I will update with all the new episodes on my Twitter account, which is @PaceyPerform. All older episodes can also be caught on iTunes and over at paceyperformance.co.uk. You can also listen online, but I'll put the link up to that every time a new episode comes out on Twitter. But without all that spiel that no one wants to hear, here's the interview with Jason Webber, and I hope you take as much out of it as I did. Okay guys, thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today I've got Jason Webber on the line. So just before Jason gets going, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to him for coming from Western Australia. So welcome, Jason.
Okay, Rob.
Would you mind just giving us a little run through on your introduction, your background, your education, and where you're currently working?
Sure. I've been in strength and conditioning now for professionally as a lead S&C coach, high performance manager for nearly 17 years. I started in rugby with the Super Rugby system, with the Queensland Reds, the New South Wales Waratahs. I was at the Wallabies for 8 years through the 2003, 2007 World Cups. Then I joined, swapped codes in Australia to the Australian Football League and joined Fremantle Dockers, where I've been for 6 years now. As far as education goes, I did a bachelor's degree in sports science and a master's degree in sports science as well. So realistically, my background is in exercise physiology in academics. But I was very lucky as a junior athlete to spend some time around the Australian Institute of Sport, and that's where I really learnt to lift and condition. And that's I always like to make clear when we're talking to other conditioning coaches, especially young ones, that it's not just the academics. I think it's important, but I learnt to lift off some very, very good coaches and learn a lot of my running skills there as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the big formation of my background.
So how was the transition between the two codes?
It was pretty smooth. I think there were some bumps early, and probably the first year or two there were little bits and pieces of learning, and certainly coming to grips with a new head coach I had at the time. So he was only new as a head coach, so he was learning a lot as well. There were certainly some massive differences for guys in the UK. Rob and I were talking before. I think to describe AFL, it's the running of football or soccer, as we would call it, but it's just on a much bigger scale. The field's bigger. The game goes 30 minutes longer than a soccer game goes. We don't play as frequently as soccer, but obviously then we can tackle and carry the ball as well. So the contact element's nowhere near as high as rugby, but it's certainly there. So transition was interesting, but certainly I think the elements I brought from rugby, which was really getting the guys strong, has made a difference. It's certainly a trend the AFL as a whole has followed in recent years.
So what's a normal week look like for you? I know you say that you don't play as much as the soccer players do, so what's a normal week?
A normal in-season week for us depends a little bit on travel, but primarily if we went for a Saturday to Saturday week, which sometimes we play 7-day turnarounds, sometimes 8, sometimes 6, would be play Saturday, recover, medicals on a Sunday. Monday the players have off, but they're required to do a light run, just what we call an acid flush run. There might be more treatment there if someone was injured. Tuesday we would run generally a team session that would involve some modest speeds, a little bit of speed work on our behalf, between 5 into sometimes 6.5K, maybe a little longer. We would lift after that, lower body. Wednesday is generally an off-feet day, so yoga, recovery, upper body weights. Thursday again becomes another football session, which is much faster, far more speed and repeat lactic orientated. Again, we would lift, again more power orientated on the Thursday. Friday is a recovery day again, and lots of meetings going on in all these times. Friday, if our lean muscle mass guys, so guys were trying to gain weight, they would lift again on the Friday, and then pretty much prepare for game Saturday.
So you mentioned yoga on the Wednesday. Is that something that's come in recently, or is that something you've done for a while?
No, we've used it quite continuously since I've been here, probably more formally in the last handful of years, but it's certainly something that's been a core element of my philosophy, I guess, if you like, over a number of years. And at the moment, I'm lucky I've got a very, very good yoga coach, if you like, that really fits my environment. So we work very hard to keep that involved. So
is that something the lads buy into pretty well? I know you obviously said it's been going on for a while.
They buy in. They buy in very, very well. It's a very good modality for us from two perspectives, not just the range of motion and mobility that we get from it, but my yoga instructor puts some very nice meditation elements to it. And I think all the boys, we do work very hard on mental preparation, and that ability to down-regulate and have those recovery elements is fantastic, and the boys do appreciate it.
So just moving on to, I want to talk to you. I've got loads of notes here ready to go through, but I want to talk to you about your website, Old Bull Fitness. How did that come about, and what was the kind of vision for it?
Really, I was just looking for a vehicle to create something behind our profession. Clearly, we all exist in strength and conditioning at the pro level at it's a fairly volatile profession. I've been very lucky over a number of years to stay involved at a very good level, but I'm cognizant that there's only 2 jobs in Western Australia that I can do, of which I have one. And if I had to move on at some point, which no doubt I will, you're not going to work in one place forever. You really need to have something else behind you. So I decided to do the website just to see if I wrote my ideas down and things that I do and practice and share those, if there was an appetite for it and people were looking to learn. Because again, I guess as I said earlier, I see a lot of people coming out of university and having a very fixed view on things from an academic perspective, and it does worry me at a utopian sort of perspective that people are getting the wrong message about what strength and conditioning is, and it is a coaching role. You have to understand in a very practical way mechanics, physiology, psychology all in one go in order to get what you need done with people. So I just tried to share that, and it's gone along nicely. We seem to have got a little bit of momentum, and people seem to relate to what I'm saying. So I'm looking forward to doing more as I go forward, and hopefully at some point expanding it into fitness industry stuff as well. As I've got an interest in training gentlemen who are a little bit older. I'm 45 myself, and I'm very cognizant of some of the limitations as you get older. And I think with the advent of things such as CrossFit and the like, which have done a great job at getting people into gyms and training and the like, certainly at times it doesn't suit some guys, and I think there's probably something there I could help deliver as well. So that's the vision going forward.
Mm. I mean, I looked on your website as a bit of a prep for this, but at the top there's a tab that's philosophy. How important is it for coaches to have a clear philosophy? And obviously, because it's so essential, how do guys go about creating one?
Yeah, I think it's extraordinarily important. I run a mentorship program, and the very first lecture I do with my group is really about my philosophy, and this is where I stand. So I always talk about strategy and tactics, and strategy is the practical evolution of your philosophy. So what do you believe? What direction do you take for any given modality? How am I going to move forward? The tactics are then the exercises you choose, the repetition ranges, the distances, the recovery rates, all those. They're all the skills that we use to bring the strategy to life. So I think the philosophy, and the reason I wrote it up there, was to show people where I'm coming from. I think I can only write from one perspective, and that is what I know and understand, which is, to be blunt, rugby conditioning and AFL conditioning. I could make some comments about soccer, but I don't really know. So I wrote those things up there to show people this is what I'm about. If you have an empathy with that and you want to hear more about it, stick around. And equally make a few points about things like, I try to write original. I know there's plenty of strategies about regurgitating other people's work, but I do try to write as originally as I can. These are my thoughts. This is what I do, and as practically as possible. So in order to develop philosophy, I think young coaches need to identify mentors, whether they be practical or certainly mentors in the literature, that you're going to follow their work. And I think the number one step is committing to paper, writing down what you believe. Absolutely make a statement. This is what I believe. And noting that things are going to change as you get older and more experienced. You'll refine your ideas. And some you may end up with some cathartic experiences that make you change things quite radically. But I think committing it to paper means you making a statement. You don't necessarily have to show it to anybody, but it's a commitment to say, this is what I believe. And I use my philosophy every day. So if I'm in every decision I'm making, I will reflect on, is this consistent with what I believe? Am I making a decision that's off tangent? And it just keeps me centered. It keeps me down a path I know I want to go, and it keeps me accountable to myself. And while professional sport as a whole is a very accountable environment, I think being accountable to yourself means that the quality of your work can stay at the highest level, irrespective of whether I'm working, in the AFL or I'm coaching somebody in the park. I would expect that of myself that I deliver the same quality work. So I think the philosophy allows you that foundation.
So you one of the blog posts that you've put about your four guiding principles for team training design, how has your philosophy guided you to come to them four guiding principles?
Well, I think, it's a really dynamic area because it really depends on who you're working with as to what you can do. I've had experiences with a number of coaches in rugby where one coach said to me, we're not going to condition or we're not going to do any conditioning running or anything of that nature. We're going to train that hard in football that you're not going to need to. I said, okay, coach, I'll back you up. I don't believe it, but I'll back you up. Let's go. And I then quantified what we'd been doing versus what we did in games and was able to prove to him quite conclusively that when you change drills, and this is where we come to some of the specifics of the principles, when you take things away from the game, and all training represents the game at some point, just as sprint drilling represents maximum velocity running or acceleration. You're taking elements out to practice very specifically certain components. So these principles that I wrote were really around that. So the first one, quantification, is exactly as I described. Being able to quantify what you're doing dictates what you can manipulate. The specificity really comes down to those elements. So as I said, if you're training for rugby, as soon as you take contact out, it changes the scope of things massively. So I have distinct memories of being involved with the Queensland Reds very early on in my career, and we had a hooker who typically very rarely ever touched the ball other than line-out throws and ruck maul contests, which is in some respects what you want of a hooker. But we would go to team training sessions, and he would always end up on the end of these attacking lines. And I used to argue that's not what he does. Why are we practicing that when you need him making contact with the opposition? You need him, making ground through contact, not doing something that's completely non-specific to his position, which at the time fell on deaf ears. But it's something I've always pushed, is that if we can maintain high specificity, which has its challenges, obviously rugby, you're making contact all the time, you get a better result. So it doesn't matter, not everything has to be high specificity, but you've got to understand at what time you're doing highly specific drills versus what times you're not. And what sort of blend that those two things have really comes down to the philosophy that you build with your coach. And none of this can be done by yourself. You can't, I can't have my philosophy and this is what we're going to do, because it does come down to the coach, and it depends again on how much skill practice they want to do versus conditioning practice. And I would say in my current experience in AFL, the more specific you can get your practice and your conditioning, the far better you go and the far more effective you can be in a shorter period of time. When it comes down to long seasons and players that are really at the end of their physiological threads, I suppose, you want to optimise that time on the field. So you want to know that if you've got 30 minutes, 40 minutes on the field, whatever it is, that you're getting bang for your buck the whole time and not wasting time. The isolation principle relates to specificity, and the more you practice a single element of a play, the more you become imbalanced. Again, at times you need to practice restarts, you need to practice lines, that's fine. But at some point you want to get everything operational together, and if you can modify or control the amount of isolated drills, too many isolated drills throws you off kilter. A good balance between isolated practice, and then your more complex and specific drills, the better you'll go. And then the last principle is really the power broker one from my perspective. If you've got control, influence over the details, volume, intensity, density, and frequency training, if you can control those, then you really have the opportunity as a conditioning coach to monitor within a football structured session what they're doing. And if I'm very lucky, I work with a coach at the moment who has tremendous insight into, I guess, our profession and how we operate, and we're able to generate work of that nature where we can say, we like to push a little bit more aerobically, so we'll do this to the drills. We'll drag them out, we'll increase the density of the training, but we'll drop that velocity. How are we going to achieve that? If we want to do more speed lactic, we can do these things to the drills that will change that. So they're really the four key points that I tried to convey that help young coaches start to get their team sessions online. And it really does come down to helping educate your football coaches, your team coaches, because they rarely think of these things because it's not their directive, so to speak.
So number one, you mentioned about quantifying training. With so much technology kind of more readily available and cheaper, what's your most, it's something you talk about in your blog quite a lot, is regards to technology. What's the most, from your point of view, the most vital piece of technology that can be kind of utilised as an S&C coach?
I think certainly with where I'm at and is the GPS units. And they're not, they probably need to come up with another name, but the GPS, the accelerometer, the magnometers, all those tools can be used really effectively to quantify what you're doing in training. And I think from where I'm at and the situation I'm in presently, they're the key element we utilise on a day-to-day basis without question. But with reference to technology as a general point, I have pushed the point recently, and I certainly lost a few people who read it. I think young coaches coming out of university and starting their career need to understand how to do basic things, how to do time and motion analysis with a stopwatch and a one-on-one video. That's the way we used to do it. How do we quantify it? Start, stop, stopwatch, describe what they're doing. Because those are fallbacks, because they're the basis of your skill set. When the technology becomes available, well, then that just makes you that bit better. But I do fear at the moment for, again, young coaches that I see, that I interview. I hired a new coach just this past sort of season, and some of the people I saw there really had no idea about coaching. They were just totally reliant upon these numbers, which, as I said, I think they should be used to, as I've made comment before, accelerate your program. That's not the basis. That's not where we start. Same in the gym. I really love the gym aware system. I've been involved with those guys since their outset as a company, and fantastic piece of equipment. But again, I think the core elements of teaching someone to lift correctly, to get the right postures, to apply force quickly through the ground is not about how fast you can move the little bit of fishing wire. It's effectively how your hip moves across your foot. And getting those things right are far more important to me than just pursuing numbers. And I think there's been enough examples in recent years of AFL of coaches who've just chased numbers and it falls apart. I think, again, part of my mentorship program, we talk a lot about mechanics. I don't profess to be a track expert or anything of that nature, but you've got to get within the limits of what a person can learn. You've got to get them mechanically as efficient as possible. You get that mechanical efficiency, then you're going to get performance. And then that performance down the track, you can measure with technology. Certainly when you look at things like force plates and the like, they can definitely help with quantifying, your ground contacts and the like. But again, and even ourselves, I talk to our coaches, being able to visually make sense of what that contact, when that running, that doesn't look right. That guy's ground contact is poor. He's not coming off that left foot as well as he should. They're things that you should be able to pick up as a coach. And as I said, I think the addition of technology amplifies that down the track, but good coaches start with good skill.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I spoke to Mike McGuigan about in a previous episode. Like you said, there's so much monitoring going on. How has your delivery to the technical coaches changed? Because at the end of the day, if that delivery isn't what it should be and it doesn't influence training, there's no point. So how has that your delivery to the technical coaches changed as technology's come in?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think we've got a lot of numbers, and really what we've worked on at Fremantle is trying to ensure that, again, based on our group philosophy and where we're at, what numbers do we really value? What numbers do we know that when they change, they present risk? And we approach from a holistic perspective, if you like, a number of different angles. But the idea is to build a case. So I rarely jump at one piece of information. But if I see a piece of information is down, well, then I want to know more about that. So if I see that a player's game data from the weekend, their high speed running is up quite significantly and out of character, well, then that would lead me from Saturday to come in when the data's processed on the Sunday, me to say, okay, where's this guy at now? What's injury clinic look like? How's he pulled up? Is he reporting any particular soreness? Well, hang on, now his sit and reach has gone down by 2 centimetres on one side. What's happened there? And he might have any number of issues going on, but you start to build a case. And so if I'm going to the coach and saying, well, look, coach, I think we need to modify this athlete, it's because there's 3 or 4 things feeding that decision. It's never one specifically. You really have to paint a picture, and not dissimilar from the point earlier about educating to the coach's body of knowledge. The coach has to value things as well. So if you go into him and start ripping off, he's HRV, he's doing this and that, and the coach is going, well, what's HRV? Well, you're in a bit of trouble. You really need to get the coach, the senior skills coach, on board with what you're doing, what it means, and what we value.
Yeah, it seems really a simple thing to say education is the key, but from your experience, how do you deliver that education? Is it getting them in front of a PowerPoint presentation, or is it getting them out, looking at the testing equipment and actually getting them involved?
No, it's personal skills, mate. Yeah. It's spending time with the person. And early on, when my coach now was new 3 years ago, and really as soon as he got in the door, I was making time to sit with him and go through one thing at a time. Don't overload him with information. He said, what have you done before? He knows this, and this. He knows 5 things. Okay, I'm going to add 6. Here's a 6th thing. This is what we look at. Okay. And in my case, very lucky, coach was able to pick up on a number of things very quickly, and within a short period of time, we were able to demonstrate beyond doubt that those things were effective. And from there, he's built trust, or I've built trust with him, and he now has confidence in those things. So he's embraced those numbers. I would say the same thing for me at the moment of GPS, that I can describe things to him in the middle of a session that he effectively uses it as a speedometer. He knows how the group's going. He asked me, how is that drill? Where are we at? How are we going? So he's cognizant of an accountability being placed on him to keep the drill at the right tempo. So that it is education, mate. For me, it's never PowerPoints. Mm-hmm. But it is about, and this is again for me a coaching skill. You got to understand the person. You can't sit there and point your finger and say, I know what's going on. This is our philosophy. This is how we work. Where are you at? My coach had come from another successful team. Okay, let's build on that and take it to another level. And you're dead right. It is easy. It's easy to say. Not all coaches get it. My previous coach to this didn't get much of it, and to be honest, I didn't share a lot of it with him. I would simply, if I knew there was a strong case for a player to be out, I'd get the doctor to help me go in and say, well, okay, this is where we're at. Let's go get him out. That's it. You've got to work within the bounds of what that person presents. So you've got to learn to read a person. You've got to learn to understand where they're coming from. What's their background? What do they know? And build that team trust. So it's never simple. And I have seen guys go in to coaches' meetings with highfalutin academic sports science hat on, and it's like hitting a brick wall. They get nothing. You got to get in the trenches with these guys, get an empathy with them, and get them on your side. If it means, and I read a really good blog the other day. The gentleman's name eludes me at the moment. I'll think of it in a moment, but he made a great point about HRV and saying, well, it's a great tool, but it doesn't fit my environment. And his wasn't coaching, but you may find that certain things that everyone else is using and looks really good in all the papers doesn't fit your environment because of a reason with the coach. And that's, I think, the skill in all of this, and putting your program together and managing it, is making sure it works for your environment because they're not the same. Mate, I had 8 years at the Wallabies, and what I do now at Fremantle is not the same. There are common elements, but it's not the same, irrespective of the game.
Yeah,
it's a question long, can't I?
No, that's fine, mate. That's fine. So you talked a little bit about, a lot about your relationship with technical coaches. How does that differ when it comes to physio, the relationship between yourself and the physio? I know it's another blog post. I feel like I'm jumping about a little bit, but it's something that kind of fascinated me when I read it. How's that kind of developed over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I was incredibly fortunate to work with some great physios from very early in my career. And I genuinely mean healers. I don't mean people who just come in and, go through the motions. These are healers. These are people who can put their hands on people and genuinely make a difference for a lot of different reasons. And there's some great skill sets. So from those people early on, and this is back when I was with Australian 21s for 3 years back in the mid-90s. I learned some great hands-on skills. So back those times, speaking like an old man, we used to travel with a doctor, a physio, and myself. There was no massage therapist. There was none of that. So I did all massage. When I was at the Reds the first year, I was the massage therapist on the road. So I've learned a lot of hands-on skills. I've augmented that with a lot of physiotherapy skills. I'm not a physiotherapist, I don't claim to be, but I do claim to have a very strong empathy and understanding of what they do and how they think. To the extent that when I came to Fremantle, there's another school of thought that they used here, which I took the time to learn and I have a great appreciation for and a great respect for now. So again, my personal philosophy is I invest time in the people. I've got a really good, 3 physios with me at the moment. All of them are accredited sports physio. They have master's degrees in sports physiotherapy. One has a PhD. And we get on based on a mutual respect of what each other has to contribute. I tend to run a very open environment. Please excuse my dog in the background. I run an open environment. Everyone gets to have their opinion. And if the opinion of the group is divided, I'll make the call. Then that's my job as the boss. And everyone understands that if I make a call, that's it, we move. But having good people on board who are prepared to work as a team is critical. And that comes down to your staff selection. And you've got to pick good people. I've not hired very, very qualified people before because I didn't rate the quality of person they are.
Yeah, you mentioned.
The foundation of getting that right is people.
Yeah, you mentioned your experience in massage and actually getting hands-on. Is that do you think that's a vital part of the kind of learning process?
For me, I think it was. I think I learnt so much about. I'd seen the anatomy. I'd seen that we'd done the cadaver work, and but understanding tone of the muscle and how that interacts with performance, I think is fantastic. I think I've learned a lot from track and field coaches. I know of quite a number of physiotherapists who are, track coaches who are physiotherapists or physical therapists in America. And understanding and learning tone gives you an insight into where players are at. Now, with rugby, I found that it was more my outside backs and my really fast guys that made a big difference. That being said, when we saw excessive or big scrummaging loads, certainly the impact that played on the psoas, iliacus, that sort of musculature, and your ability to recognise that tone and then impacted by appropriate treatment was critical to my understanding then of, if that's what happened in the scrum, I need to reflect that when we go and do strength training later in the day, or does the recovery modality fit that? What have I got to do to resolve that? So we scrum in the evening, we're going to lift the next morning. Well, what have I got to do to get that guy to the gym session ready to go? So I think the hands-on skills are critical, I think, to my development. Do I push everyone into it? No. I've got some guys that just, not into it. They don't, and that's fine. But equally, my coaches at work who who are open enough to it. I teach them what I know, and I get them to interact with the physio. So we have an appreciation. And as I said, I think that understanding the true meaning of tone and the different ways it presents in different people is critical to getting the best out of your athletes.
So was that a formal qualification you went through, or just something you just kind of fell into because the needs were there?
That's on the job training.
Okay.
Look, to be honest, if you offered me, if I won lotto, you gave me $10 million or something tomorrow, I didn't have to go to work, I'd probably study physiotherapy to be a better strength and conditioning coach.
Okay.
Not that I wanted, the real musculoskeletal stuff. Not really interested in pulmonary physiotherapy and that, but the way, if you could take that information into your training of athletes, I think it gets a fantastic result. And I have seen it particularly in rugby, with my faster athletes, the ability to get more out of them in training when they're appropriately prepared. Outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, we've kept you for nearly half an hour now, so I'm just gonna wrap up a little bit. But just before you leave us, I want to just get your bit of an overview on one of the blogs you wrote late last year about the 10 tips for getting into professional sport as an S&C coach, and more importantly, staying there. Do you want to give us a little bit of an overview on your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think obviously there were 2 articles that pertain to that. I think if I was to overview it, I think the first point I made in the top 10 tips for surviving was your personal quality, your integrity. Don't ever compromise. I think I think already tonight I've spoken enough about what I feel about interacting with people. I think the quality of the person starts everything running. If you get that right, then they can learn, they can be open. I met with some senior S&C coaches the last couple of days, a few mates of mine from the Brumbies and the Reds, a couple of great guys. And we were talking a lot about this and saying that, well, there's no point. You can't go to work every day with someone who's really smart, but he's an absolute pain in the butt, and it makes you sick working with him every day. You've got to have, as I said, honest, respectful people, high effort, high humility. I'm not interested in big heads who roll around telling me how good their degree is and all that. We've got to be workers at the coalface, and we've got to be, and I'm a strong believer in team. I can't do this job by myself. It would kill me. But with the right people in place, I can do it, which means, we have to work together, and good people will ultimately succeed. And I believe we can teach them, and we can all grow together and be better at what we do. I think in terms of keeping your job, which is obviously I'm relatively good at, it's the head coach is something that I think I was previously not as good at, and I identified it as a fault, and I've improved, is your communication with the head coach. You've got to prioritise that. You've got to make sure you are close to that person. You don't have to be, like in their back pocket having dinner at their house every day, but I went through a period where I made sure every day I didn't leave the building until I went and stuck my head in the door and said, we're all done. Everything's good. How are you going? And some of the conversations that flow from that about team selection, just the casual conversation, give you insight into what's going on, allow you to communicate again at a more or a less pressurized environment to get your information, get your message across. So I think that's always a key one. And if I was to think of one other one that sometimes I think gets lost is you've got to get your athlete on the park. I've seen some people write posts about, don't compromise your training because you don't want to injure people. Well, there's an old saying in sailing that I really like. In order to finish first you must finish. You can't win the game and you can't succeed if you don't have that guy on the field at the end of the game. So number one priority is you've got to do what it takes to get that guy on the field. If that means, we're going to not do a functional exercise. We're going to do leg press because that's what's required. I can't get this guy to express force any other way. Well, then you know what? We're leg pressing. It doesn't look good on a blog. It doesn't look good to, all the movement guys out there throwing their message around. But I think from a professional coach perspective, you've got to do what it takes to get it done and identify where the risks lay and try to minimise them and get them on the park. If you can get them on the park and keep them there, that's when your team will do better. And that's, as I keep saying to my coaches, you can looking to identify risk. What's going to get in your way of putting them on the field and doing what they need to do? It's this and this. Well, okay, let's identify those things and eliminate. That might be mobility. It might be high tone in a muscle you don't want tone in. It might be, to be technical, can be low tone in a muscle, just as debilitating and risky as high tone. So, there's a couple of points there that I sort of fall back on all the time. And if I was to take your time and badge one more point, would be for young coaches coming out, I think academics, a base level of academics is critical because you have to understand the level of detail of anatomy, physiology, biomechanics in order to converse with a physiotherapist, with a doctor. But then you need to have skill. You need to be able to lift. You need to be able to run. You need to be able to demonstrate running drills. I don't ask my coaches and myself. We don't lift as much as the players. We don't go as fast as the players, but we can demonstrate it. All my staff have to go through a physical exam just to get in the job. So that's my take on it.
So just one last thing. What does that physical exam entail?
And the most recent one, pretty much demonstrate. We started with just some basic stuff. Demonstrate an A-skip drill. Show me an A-skip. Good. Show me a calf skip. What other drills would you use when you're coaching a player? Show me them. Again, I have a set structure as to how we drill with Fremantle. I wasn't necessarily looking for them to do them the way I wanted them, but they had to show a level of skill that at least showed me they bought into an idea of that's what I do. That's how I coach that drill. So again, it came back to philosophy. Clearly, this guy has a philosophy. He can do the drill and he knows where it fits. The guys then had to front squat, back squat, deadlift, not with any marked weight on, but had to show me the key points and be able to get the positions. I did get them to do a power clean. And again, making sure they could get into the rack, making sure that principally they were executing the second pull correctly. Again, we worked on those skills and improved them, but the coach had to demonstrate that at least with an empty bar, he was capable of getting a message across. Because I have been in a situation before where I acquired a number of coaches in a role I had, and none of them could demonstrate a running drill, any running drill, with any level of competency. So how am I supposed to administer a national level program when the people at my disposal really don't know what I'm talking about with running? And it's a running sport, or it was then.
So if you got a guy that came to you and he was competent at a front squat or a deadlift, but only competent, would you insist that they spend so many hours a week improving that?
Well, I think then I'd go to the bigger model and say, well, he looked okay, like he had an idea. And there's a bit of me that says having an idea because you went to a course and learnt it, I'm not real cool with that. Do you actually lift? You don't have to lift 5 times a week, but have you lifted? Have you lifted sufficiently to have an empathy with the athlete that I know what a deadlift feels like? I know what it feels like to drag the bar up my shin. I'm lucky enough to be 6'4", so when I'm talking to my AFL players who are tall, mate, you're going to have to take skin off your shins coming up because you're tall. You've got long femurs, it's going to happen. So there's an empathy with that as opposed to a guy maybe came through a course and won't push quite as hard as that. So I am very big on staff having an empathy, understand what it is like to step into their shoes, do the running sessions with them, not all of it necessarily, but certainly get a feel when you're doing a repeat speed session. What does it feel like? You get to that 5th, 6th rep. What should it feel like? Is that distance correct? Are the times right? Are the breaks right? So it's probably a little bit more than just, but if a guy had a reasonable skill and they demonstrate a personality type and that would engage learning quickly, I might be inclined to go with them. But definitely the guy I hired recently had fantastic skill set. His running drills weren't great, but he's learnt them exceptionally well now. And he lifts on a regular basis. He'll get in the gym once, twice a week, and he's very, very competent. He's above competent easily.
Yeah, we've gone through some great stuff. So I just want to remind everyone, you can remind everyone where they can catch you on social media. So obviously you put lots of stuff out on Twitter, forwarding people to your blog. What's your Twitter handle?
Twitter is at Jason A. Weber. Weber with one B, Weber. Website's the easiest place. That's where everything starts. That's where all the information is, and that's simply www.oldbullfitness.com. So we've got a couple of projects coming up later in the year that certainly S&C coaches who are looking to move up in the world and get more integrated management, and a lot of the things I've talked about tonight. We're going to run quite a significant webcast project, which I hope will be well received, but we're putting a fair bit of work into it at the moment. So looking forward to getting that out there.
So very briefly, what does that entail?
Basically, we're going to go through myself and a very good friend of mine who's been involved in conditioning in English Premier League soccer, and he's back in Australia at the moment in AFL. We're going to deliver top to bottom how we run our environments. A little bit different. There's different slants on things, but talk about how we integrate these pieces, because they're not, again, the young coaches coming out of these masters programs you see at the moment, a lot of them see the world very segmented, where it's not. Everything is related. You've got to be able to put the jigsaw puzzle together in order to get the most out of your people. And when you're running squads of 45 players and the like, it takes a bit of work. And again, you need help. You need good people around you, but you need a strong system to help you build that ability to keep people, as I said, on the field.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It sounds really good. So, it's been 45 minutes, so 15 minutes longer than I promised you.
No problem at all, man.
So I'll let you go. And just before we go, just thanks very much for giving up your time. Really appreciate it. So, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good luck with all your work as well.
Thank you very much, mate. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, thank you for tuning in to episode 12 of the Pace Performance Podcast. If you want to check out all older episodes, you can check them out on iTunes or over at paceperformance.co.uk. Best place to keep up to date with the podcast is you can follow me on Twitter at PacePerform, and all the links go out there for all new episodes. And I will check you in episode 13.